And I now give the floor to Ms. Robi Damelin.
So I didn't come here to bring dialogues, to bring PowerPoints, to make wonderful statements about intellectual ways to end this conflict. I came here to talk to your hearts, because that is what I can do, because I am, let me say, one of the victims, but I don't call myself a victim. I have become a victor of what is happening in a conflict which should have ended long ago. We could sit here and do a comparison of suffering. I could give contra-arguments, but the fact is that people are dying. 68 children died in Gaza. Who will remember their names? Do you know any of the names of those children? So it's very difficult for me to sit here and not bring you into the reality of what it is to lose a child. When the army came to tell me that my son had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, one of the first things that I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. And this has been the work that I have been doing ever since. I joined the Parent Circle Families Forum, which is an organization of more than 600 families who've all lost an immediate family member to the conflict. What we see as a vision is to create a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any political peace agreement. We signed all kinds of stuff on the White House lawn. Everybody hugged each other and it all looked very charming. But the people were never involved. And we have to do something to bring a realization that without this reconciliation, there will never be peace. What there can be, at best, is a ceasefire until the next time. I joined the Parent Circle after I'd been to a weekend in East Jerusalem with other bereaved Palestinian mothers. And I looked into their eyes, and I suddenly realized that we shared the same pain, and that any grave that I stood over of my own child, the same grave that Bushra would stand over for her child, the tears that fell into that grave were the same color. And that we together, if we could stand on the stage and talk in the same voice for reconciliation, for non-violence, and for getting out of the occupied territories, wouldn't that be the most powerful statement? And wouldn't that also be an example to others? It's all very well making political statements. It's all very well being pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. But what are you doing with that? You're importing our conflict into your country and creating hatred between Jews and Muslims. So if you cannot be a part of the solution, I would urge you to leave us alone. Come to Israel and Palestine. Come and see what's happening on the ground. Listen with empathy. Come to one of our dialogue meetings or to one of the things that the women's groups. You know, to go into an average Israeli school of 17-year-olds, a Palestinian and an Israeli, and normally I would have sat next to the Palestinian. I found it rather strange that we had to sit separately, because that's the way that we work. If you go into an average Israeli school of 17-year-olds and you will ask the children, who of you have ever met a Palestinian? Guess what? Nobody. And who speaks Arabic? Maybe one in the whole class. And who's been overseas? 80% of the kids. They've never met a Palestinian. They've never met the humanity in the other. And suddenly they hear a story of transformation, a story of loss, a story of somebody who got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and faced the indignities of coming through a checkpoint to come to their school to talk about nonviolence, to talk about change, to talk about their own story. Suddenly there's a human being. And by the way, they don't all become Martin Luther King, but they do have a sense of who's on the other side. And I go very often into the West Bank, into many homes, not only me. You know, I'm here as a person, but I represent 600 families. And going into a Palestinian home where they look at me in the beginning quite aggressively. But when I tell my personal story, what happens is there's an emotional breakthrough because they suddenly see the humanity. And what also happens is that they join the parent circle, and not only for bereaved people. We work mainly on the ground with parallel narratives, which many of the countries, as I'm looking around me, could well learn some of the projects that we are doing. And I want to bring hope, because I listen to you talking, and all that you can sense is a comparison of suffering and a lack of hope. So let me tell you a short story about hope. We have a very, very active women's group. And I came to talk to them one Saturday morning, to the Palestinian women, and I asked them, what is it that you really need? And they said, we need money. We want to earn our own living. And imagine, it's not very easy to be a peacemaker if you don't have money to pay for your children's school or for the food that you put on the table. And so I said, okay, so then what is it that you really love to do? Tell me what your passion is. So one likes to do flowers, and one hair, and one sews, and one photography, and one accountancy. And I said, okay, let's open a wedding planning business. And guess what? The light came back into the eyes of women who suddenly don't forget that any Palestinian that belongs to the parent circle is already a leader. They are working against the tide. Imagine the light that comes into a woman's eyes when she knows she has a future profession. Last week, 40 women started to do this whole course of having a certificate and a profession afterwards. Can you imagine how joyful that is in these terribly dark times? And we will do 2 weddings for brides who cannot afford to have weddings as a beginning of this program. It is something that brings hope. We started a parallel narrative course this week. There are many things happening on the ground that you probably are not aware of. I wish, instead of us sitting around this table, that you all took yourselves off and came to understand that there is hope. Because I can tell you in this room that if there's no hope, there will never be peace. It is a remarkably important equation in any peace-seeking work that you do. Please, please look into the work of so many organizations. 2 weeks ago, we did the memorial ceremony. In Israel, it's the official memorial ceremony for Israeli soldiers. But we do an alternate ceremony. And we have Palestinians and Israelis coming to tell the stories of their loss. And one Palestinian came whose son had been killed, and he donated the organs of his son to Israeli hospitals. Can you imagine, for an Israeli who's never heard a story like that, having to be exposed to something like that? And by the way, 200,000 people tuned in online to the ceremony. It's a very important step for us to make and for people to listen to. I just have to tell you that the Palestinians in our organization reckon if the Hamas will kidnap me, they'll give me back in half an hour because I talk such a lot. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for giving a small opportunity, but it would be so much better if you actually could listen with empathy. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Damelin for her briefing.